What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the show. It is Halloween week. Happy Halloween. I hope everybody is having a most wonderful week. We certainly are at Barely Qualified Picks. And we are excited to be back with you today. It's Wednesday, which means it's college football day. Of course, we've got updated playoff projections for you. We've got our week 10 top 5 picks, and then we're making a segment change. Instead of others receiving votes, we're throwing that out and we're bringing in a new segment called Big Game Tracker, where we're going to take a look at some of the biggest games across the country that have the most opportunity to impact the conference and playoff races. We'll give you either a pick or a lean on each one of those games. And then, because it is Halloween week, and we love Halloween at the Ceccarelli household, we love the costumes, we love the scary movies, we love the sweets and the treats and the trick-or-treating, we love the communal aspect of it with friends and neighbors, we love all of it. We're going to wrap the show with a special segment called Uncle Denny's Top 10 Trick or Treats. These are the 10 sweets that I most hope to pull out of my daughter's treat bags when I dad tax the shit out of them at the end of Halloween night. Now, before we get on to playoff projections, I want to talk a little bit about this coaching carousel because it got even crazier this week with the dismissal of Brian Kelly from LSU on Sunday. Brian Kelly paid $53 million in his buyout to not coach the Tigers going forward. That makes him the second coach to be paid over $50 million alongside James Franklin at Penn State to not coach their team anymore, which is wild when you think about it. LSU is looking at this two ways. One, all the noise coming out of LSU is that they want the top coach in the country. They know that they're the top job in the country. We're going to talk about the contract in a second because that's the one bugaboo here that's got to go one way or the other. But if you set contract length and dollars aside, there is no better job than LSU. And for my money, Penn State is better than Florida. We'll get to that another day. But LSU over Penn State over Florida, and LSU knows that. They could, in theory, go get almost anybody they want. And that would include coaches like Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Sorry, Ole Miss fans. That would include coaches like Brent Key at Georgia Tech. Sorry, Yellow Jackets fans. That would include coaches like Dan Lanning at Oregon. Sorry, Oregon Duck fans. It hurts my heart to say it, but it's true. Now, let's talk about that contract. Because all of the noise coming out of Louisiana, including from the Louisiana governor's mansion, is that they don't want to pay for failure anymore. They want to pay for success. And if a coach fails, they want the coach to carry that risk. Well, how are they going to do that exactly? Because in today's college football, coaches get these big 10-year, $100 million deals at the biggest schools that have massive buyouts should the school decide to fire them. The coach doesn't carry any risk. The school carries all of the risk. So if you are an LSU and you want the best, most proven coach on the market because your fan base says we need to win tomorrow, don't bring me somebody who's up and coming. You're not going to get them to sign on to some smaller deal or some incentive-laden deal that shifts even some material percentage of risk from the school to the coach. They're just not going to do it. But if LSU does go give one of those big contracts out, they can go get anybody they want. What are they going to do? It's going to be very interesting to see. One fun little side story is, will athletic director Scott Woodward participate in the LSU coaching search? Because the Louisiana governor says Woodward will not be allowed on the search committee. Not only will he not be the main decider on the search committee, he won't be allowed at all. I mean, think about how crazy that is. The athletic director for one of the biggest athletic departments in the entire country not allowed because the governor says so. The governor also says that Donald Trump would be more qualified and well-suited to choose a coach for LSU than Scott Woodward. And technically, if you look at Scott Woodward's last two choices, 0 for 2 in hindsight. Now, it's always tough when you're hiring a coach. Like, nobody said when he hired Brian Kelly, that's definitely the wrong guy. Although there were certainly some people who said, is Brian Kelly the right guy for the Deep South? Still, Scott Woodward hired Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, ended up paying Jimbo Fisher a $75 million buyout. Hired Brian Kelly at LSU, paying Brian Kelly a $53 million buyout. So maybe the Louisiana governor is onto something when he says Scott Woodward might just sit this one out. All right. We talked a little bit about Oregon. It would suck to lose Dan Lanning. I think back to the progeny of Oregon coaches that we've seen over the years, from the heydays of Chip Kelly to, the rock bottom of Mark Helfrich to the flash in the pan of Willie Taggart and the rise of Mario Cristobal before it felt like we hit another level with Dan Lanning. And in Dan Lanning we trust. We really need Dan Lanning to stick. I hope like heck that LSU doesn't come a knocking, and if they do come a knocking, somehow, some way, Uncle Phil and Nike keep Dan Lanning in place. Because look, Oregon can offer everything that the big schools can offer except for fertile recruiting grounds. You're just not going to find that in Oregon. You're going to get some in Washington, but you're competing against Washington. And you're going to have to go to California. You're going to have to go to Texas. And you're going to have to go to Florida at Oregon. It's already in the corner of the country. Like, you think about it as a coach, you're going to log a lot more miles than any other coach in any other part of the country. You're going to spend fewer nights in your own bed. That's real. So you've always got to be on guard when you're a school like Oregon. And I think that there are a few other schools that also have to be on guard. I mentioned the fans at Ole Miss. I mentioned the fans at Georgia Tech. The fans at Vanderbilt. Clark Lee. He's 13-77 at Vanderbilt, and it's not really clear whether he really is the perfect coach for the NIL era, or whether he's just benefiting on the great New Mexico State migration that came with coaches Jerry Kill and Tim Beck, with Diego Pavia and Eric Sowell and McKill Young. He benefited greatly from that. But still, if you look at Vanderbilt on both sides of the ball in every phase of the game, they look like a super legit team. So is it him? Is it Texas Tech coach Joey McGuire? Tech has never even played in a Big 12 title game, much less won one. But in this NIL era, Tech is competing with everybody. They've got talent all over the field. Jerry Maguire was given a blank checkbook, and he built an incredible roster. Now, you have to think about the fact that there's nowhere that Joey Maguire can go, that he's going to have more money, that he's going to have more access to talent than Texas. He might go places like LSU, where you're the clear number one in your region. There's no Texas. There's no Texas A&M. Those schools might try and come into Louisiana, but they're not going to compete with LSU for a top recruit. If you're Texas Tech, at best, you're number two and competing with Texas A&M. You're not Texas. But, SMU is looming. There's a lot of NIL money in Dallas. Baylor's not that far behind you in Waco. And you're in Lubbock, it's not like the most attractive destination. So does Texas Tech need to worry about Joey Maguire potentially jumping ship? Does Arizona State need to worry? Kenny Dillingham left Oregon to go to Oregon or to Arizona State. Does Arizona State need to worry? Kenny Dillingham left Oregon to go to Arizona State and take that head coaching job. And he said at the time it was his dream job. It was his alma mater. But if LSU comes a calling, you got to think those roots only run so deep. And then, finally, a guy like John Summerall at Tulane. He's only been there for a year and change. But he's managed the portal really well with Darian Mensah leaving, with Jake Retzloff coming in. He's kept Tulane going. So do Tulane fans need to worry about yet another coaching change? I'll tell you two fan bases that don't need to worry. Indiana fans don't need to worry, which is still weird even to say that Hoosier fans don't have to worry about their coach being snapped up by somebody else. But sure enough, Curt Cignetti just signed an 8-year, $93 million deal. I never thought that I would see a world where LSU couldn't, if they wanted to, poach Indiana's head coach. But welcome to college football in 2025. Similarly, at any other similarly situated school, back-to-back 8-0 starts would have everyone from the fans to the mascot worried about losing their head coach. But BYU likely isn't prepping a new contract for Kalani Sitake. And if they are, it's not a massive one, it's a more modest one. Much less are they worrying that he's going to leave for one of these big jobs. I mean, Kalani Sitake is a kid who rode his bike around Provo. He stopped at the chain link fence and talked to Lavelle Edwards and the players and the coaches when he was a kid and would watch BYU practice. The kind of loyalty that Sitake has shown to the BYU program is so incredibly rare these days. You have to imagine that he's not going anywhere. He is one of a kind. So All that said, you can count on Sataki. I think you can count on Signetti. But you can also count on more change before this season is through. In this new era of college football, there are just going to be more twists and turns in store than ever before. All right, y'all, we took a little break and we are back at you again with our updated playoff projections through 9 weeks. It's not going to surprise anybody that the Ohio State Buckeyes are still the number 1 seed on this list, still projected as Big Ten champs. Their national title odds actually moved down slightly from plus 270 to plus 250 during their bye week, and they get back at it this week against Penn State in what was supposed to be one of the biggest games of the year, certainly one of the biggest games on the Big Ten calendar, and is now projected to be a blowout. Ohio State minus 20.5. We'll get to that later, but Ohio State looks like they're going to cruise through this one against Penn State and continue on in their mission to defend their national championship. Right behind Ohio State, hot on their heels, our first wildcard team, the Indiana Hoosiers. Once again, I had a deep debate within myself as to whether Indiana should be number 2 or whether they should be number 1. Their complete melting, 56-6, over a UCLA team that was surging, really reinforced their place in that number 1 discussion. Now, the playoffs seem all but a lock. Unlike Ohio State, who the playoff bet is off the board, you can bet Indiana to make the playoffs. It's minus 8,000, so you'd have to bet $8,000 to win 100 on Indiana. And why would you do that? There are better places to put your $8,000, but I will say, of all the crazy things that could happen in sports, I mean, this would have to be one of the craziest things ever for Indiana not to make the playoffs. So if you did bet your $8,000, it's probably safe. Though I would say your $8,000 is probably better spent on our next team, which we'll get to in a second. Indiana's national title odds moved from plus 800, 8-1, to plus 600, 6-1 over the course of the weekend. I think that that is two things. That is, first, the defeat of UCLA and how resounding that was. And second, it's the fact that star linebacker, heart of the defense, Aiden Fisher, avoided a serious knee injury. Sounds like he could even play this week against Maryland. That was all enough to push Indiana's odds down from 8-1 to 6-1. And if you like Indiana, I don't think those odds are going to get longer. They're probably only going to get shorter. Now, the third team on the list, Alabama, representing the SEC as the projected SEC champion, their playoff odds are minus 1050. This means that you've got to put down $1,050 to win 100. I think Alabama is just about a lock to win the playoff. They have 3 tough games left. Home to LSU, which who knows what LSU team you're going to get. They're home to Oklahoma, and then they're at Auburn in what is always a tough game in the Iron Bowl. And Auburn's defense is really good this year. Anything could happen in that game. That said, I expect they're going to go 2-1 or better against that slate, and they're going to make the playoffs. So if you're going to put money down on a team to make the playoffs, Bama seems like a much better choice than Indiana at minus 1050. Now, if you're betting the national championship, I would still tell you to bet Indiana at plus 600 versus Bama at plus 750. Bama was actually ahead of Indiana in the national championship odds a week ago before Indiana smacked UCLA and before Alabama had to come back from behind to beat South Carolina on the road 29-22. That caused Bama's national title odds to go in the other direction from 6-1 to 7.5-1. That said, I think those odds are going to potentially lengthen and shorten more as we go through the year. One loss against LSU, Oklahoma, or at Auburn is not going to put Bama out of the playoffs. I really believe that. 2-1 will get them in. But it will lengthen their national title odds. So if you believe that Bama's going to go perfect against this run, then you should probably bet it now. But if you believe that Bama's going to be in that 2-1 range and still make the playoffs and still be a threat to win the national title, maybe wait a little bit. Right behind Bama is their arch nemesis, the Georgia Bulldogs, our second wild card seed. They are minus 370 to make the playoffs. So They're a favorite to make the playoffs, but those aren't the best odds in the world. And they're plus 1100, 11 to 1 odds to win the national championship. They notched another huge win in taking down Ole Miss back in week 8. And then, of course, they had week 9 off with the bye. But that 43-35 win over Ole Miss was big. And then it got even bigger when Ole Miss beat Oklahoma last week. Now, Georgia, too, has 3 games that matter the rest of the way, but it's very sweepable. Home to Florida, home to Texas, home to Georgia Tech. That Georgia Tech game is the big one on the calendar. Georgia Tech, the Ramblin' Wreck, are going to be ready for that. Georgia might have room for one more loss, but I don't think they have the margin of error that Alabama does, and ultimately, I think Georgia needs to win all 3 of these games. If they beat Florida resoundingly, if they beat Texas convincingly, and then they lose to Georgia Tech in a tight game, they're probably still in. But I think Georgia should anticipate needing to win out. Our 5th team, our 3rd wild card seed, our beloved Oregon Ducks. Oregon understandably fell from plus 950 in the national title race to 11 to 1. So, dropping back materially, not hugely, but materially. And look, I get it. After watching that 21-7 win over Wisconsin, that can only be described as meh, you had to assume that the Ducks were going to slip. They didn't slip in the polls, which I thought was generous, but you had to assume that they were going to slip in the national title odd race, and they did. They also slipped in the playoff race. There are real questions being asked about the Ducks' resume at this point, and those questions are fair. The Ducks fell from a minus 480 favorite to make the playoff to a minus 300. I wouldn't call it a favorite at this point. Like, that could go sideways quickly. And Oregon better get to answering those questions that are only getting louder in volume when they go take on the Iowa Hawkeyes on November 8th in Kinnick Stadium. That's a huge opportunity to beat an arrow-up Iowa team on the road in what is always a tough place to play, in a stadium that Indiana struggled to play in. They barely got the win. 2015 snuck out with the victory. Oregon can't sneak out with a victory. They need to go in there and they need to beat Iowa. All right. Number 6, our 6th seed and the ACC's projected champion, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. They're plus 120 to make the playoff. They're 8 to 1 to win the 80 to 1, to win the national championship. And look, I seriously debated putting the Yellow Jackets above the Ducks at this point. They are a projected conference champion. They've done a ton of work. They've got a great resume this year. But even with the work that Oregon still has to do, I think Oregon is objectively right now the better team on a neutral field. I love Haynes King, but I think Oregon has more pieces all over the field. I think the Big Ten is a tougher conference than the ACC. And while Tech did shorten both their playoff and national title odds in beating the heck out of Syracuse last week, and they can do it again with another dominant week at NC State, I still think having them one slot behind the Ducks is the right place for them to be. Let's see what happens against NC State. Let's see what the Ducks do going forward. It's going to be interesting. In the 7 slot, we've got our 5th wild card, the Vanderbilt Commodores. Now, like Georgia Tech, the analysts are coming out in droves to support the Vanderbilt Commodores and their playoff candidacy. Their playoff odds fell from plus 186 to plus 114. Kind of odd odds there, pun not intended. And their national title odds fell slightly from 33 to 1 to 30 to 1. The win over Mizzou was gutty. It had playoff intensity, and those types of games harden legitimate contenders. Now the question is, can the Commodores go into Austin and put a hurt on a Longhorns team that was lucky to escape Starkville with a win? Yes, they won. Yes, they moved up in the polls from 23 to 20. And had they not won, would they be a 1.5 point favorite this weekend against Vandy? Almost certainly not. They would probably be a 3 or 3.5 point underdog. So look, Vandy, you've got to go in there and you've got to beat Texas. It can't be a lucky outcome. You can't lose, certainly. Texas isn't as good this year as this Vanderbilt team. And if Arch Manning doesn't come back, say what you want about Arch Manning. Don't believe this is going to be a Ewing theory situation where Arch Manning isn't back and yet the backup is better than what Arch Manning could have done. I just don't buy into that. And so I think this is a game that Vanderbilt has to go win. And if they do, they're going to tighten their grip on this playoff berth and potentially move up in the seeding. Now, right behind Vanderbilt, I've got the Miami Hurricanes. These next few spots are very up in the air. I feel confident about the teams, less so about the seeding. To give you an example, I have Texas A&M all the way down at 10, considered them at 8 here in Miami's slot, ultimately went with Miami. They're minus 260 to make the playoffs. They're plus 1,800, 18 to 1 to win the national championship. And look, they did what they had to do at Stanford on Saturday. They gave up the first score of the game to go down 7-0 and then scored 42 straight to win 42-7 on the farm. And ultimately, you got to be impressed with that, but to me, it's just not as impressive as what Vanderbilt did in beating Mizzou at home. The Canes stock with the playoff odds, with the national title odds, effectively unchanged. So Vegas wasn't impressed or unimpressed either. Look, the deal with the Canes is they got to win and they've got to win out. If they survive in advance, they stay here. They probably don't climb, but they stay in the field. If they stumble, their playoff hopes are dashed. That's what it is for Miami. Let's see if they can get it done. In the 9 spot, bye-bye Cincinnati. Hello BYU as our new projected Big 12 champion. The Cougars are plus 250 to make the playoffs. They're plus 12,500, so they're between 12 to 1 and 13 to 1 to win the national championship. And they've won 2 straight weeks as a 3.5-point underdog. First, taking down rival Utah at home in the Holy War, followed by last week's road win at Iowa State. There really isn't much that we don't like about BYU. They keep passing every test they take. Cincinnati is undefeated in the Big 12, yes, but they're big 8.5-point underdogs this weekend at Utah. That seems high to me, but that's going to be a very tough win to pull out in Salt Lake City. Texas Tech, of course, is the bigger threat according to Vegas, but that question is going to be answered one way or the other when BYU and Texas Tech meet in Lubbock on November 8th. Right now, we give this spot to BYU, the team with back-to-back 8-0 starts. Let's see what the Cougars can do with it. And in the 10th slot, we have our 6th wild card, the Texas A&M Aggies. They are minus 4,500 to make the playoffs. They're 10 to 1 to win the national championship. This is the one team that Vegas would say, Uncle Denny, you got it all wrong. Vegas is convinced that they are in, even though they still have to play South Carolina at home and go to Texas to close out the SEC season. Vegas thinks they've done enough. Now, if you disagree and you think they could fall out of the field, they are 13 to 1 if you bet no on Texas A&M to make the playoffs. I'm respecting Texas A&M more. I wouldn't go make that bet today, coming from 18-14 down to win 45-24 in a night game at Death Valley is downright impressive. Texas A&M climbed a spot here over Notre Dame. They could climb more if they keep winning and other teams lose. Let's see what happens with the Aggies, Marcel Reed, and crew down the road. In the 11th seed, we have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, our final wild card. They are minus 350 to make the playoffs. They're 10 to 1 to win the national championship. Back in week 8, they posted an impressive 34-24 win over USC. They had week 9 off to rest and recover and get ready for a 1-7 Boston College team that should be a total cakewalk, followed by a Navy team that's undefeated but unquestionably outmatched by Notre Dame's talent, scheme, etc. The Irish then have to go to Pitt. Pitt is not going to be a cakewalk at all whatsoever this year, but they do also have additional cakewalks over Syracuse and Stanford. So by our math, that makes for 3 cakewalks in 1 tough game. I'm not sure that the Irish should be higher than they are here, but I'm pretty confident that they'll get through these next 5 games unscathed and lock this bid up. And then finally, with the group of 5 bid, we're giving it to Tulane this week. The carousel continues to spin. Memphis beat South Florida, who was in this seat last week, in theory ending the Bulls' candidacy for the playoff berth, although Vegas's current odds would say otherwise. You might think that Memphis should naturally get the nod here because they did beat South Florida and they had this spot earlier in the year. But I actually like Tulane more than Memphis when you look at body of work and when you consider that these 2 teams are going to go head-to-head in 2 weeks' time. It doesn't really matter who we put here. They're going to figure it out on the field. But for now, let's give this seat to Tulane and let's see what shakes out in Memphis in 2 weeks. Now on to the picks. What we formerly called just our top 5 picks, we're now calling Uncle Denny's top 5 hunches of the week. This gets us more in line with our NFL picks, really a formatting change. We're doing the same depth of research. We're providing the same level of analysis. And hopefully we keep having the same level of success because we have been in the black 3 straight weeks after going 3-2 again last week. Gets us to 16-14 on the year. And while we're hungry to get more than just 2 games above 500, we know anything can happen on Halloween weekend. In our first hunch of the week, we believe number 2 Indiana is going to continue its barnstorming tour with another blowout win at Maryland. Look, the Hoosiers are firing on all cylinders, and Curt Cignetti is the type of coach that wants everyone to take note of his dominance. Go back to his intro press conference, the Google Me thing. He does win, and he does want you to notice. Indiana as a team, they're a finely tuned machine on both sides of the ball. They avoided major disaster with the Aiden Fisher injury not being a major injury. And they win big. In fact, when you look at their season thus far, outside of their road trip to Iowa, Indiana's won every game this year by double digits. And 5 of those 8 wins have cleared the 22.5-point bar that they face this weekend. When you look at Maryland, Maryland's more like UCLA and Michigan State than they are Oregon or even Iowa. So given that, we're going to spare you all of the numbers on Indiana's impressive offensive and defensive trends. Suffice to say, they're really, really good. And if they bring anything close to their A game this weekend, they're going to be likely to hit their averages. 45 points scored, 11 points allowed, 3rd nationally in both of those stats. And Maryland is likely going to underperform their averages. 28 points scored, 17 points allowed, which is 18th nationally. And you might say, but Uncle Denny, look at that Maryland scoring defense. To which I'd say, 1, look at their schedule. It's a joke in terms of the offenses that they faced outside of UW. And 2, have you seen Fernando Mendoza in the Indiana offense? Get real. Look, we could be wrong, but my sense is Curt Cignetti probably hates that Ohio State is getting the number 1 de facto status on the heels of their national championship last year, despite everything that he and his crew are doing this year. And if that's correct, I think Cignetti is going to continue to put Ohio State and everyone else on notice every week with every win ahead of the Big Ten championship game. And that's going to continue this week by forcing the talking heads to chatter about how this Hoosier offense blew apart a statistically stout Maryland defense. Give me Indiana 41-14 covering the 22.5. In our second hunch of the week, we have a strong sense that number 5 Georgia is going to rack up their 5th straight double-digit win versus Florida in what used to be called the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Look, what Florida team are we going to get this week with Billy Napier now out the door? Sometimes a team will bounce back after a coaching firing, at least for a week or two, reinvigorated by new leadership. Think about UCLA or UAB. Other times, they're content just to play out the string. We're looking at you, Oregon State. Florida has had few moments of sustainable success this year, as evidenced by the fact that they have just 2 SEC wins over Texas and Mississippi State, the latter of whom is still seeking its first conference win in over 2 years. Losses to LSU, Miami, and A&M all came by double digits, and that was when there was still hope for the coaching staff, there was still hope for the season, still hope for the future vision of the program. Now Florida is rudderless, and the disgruntled Gator fans are shifting their focus to the coaching search. Is that really a recipe for the Gators to, spring up and pull out a win in Orlando this weekend? Look, and whichever Florida team shows up, Georgia should have more than enough in their pocket to cover the 7.5. Georgia has won 4 straight games in this series. Every single one by double digits with an average margin of victory of 21.5 points. Frankly put, they've been kicking Florida's ass for years now. And they're humming right now this season, having won 3 straight SEC games following that narrow 24-21 loss to Bama. So look, as long as quarterback Gunnar Stockton keeps this Bulldog offense performing at a high level, and he's got 10 touchdowns to 1 interception on the year, it's hard to imagine Florida's DJ Lagway, who in his own right came into the year as a dark horse Heisman candidate, but now has 9 touchdowns to 9 interceptions on the year, keeping pace. Normally, you'd look at a bye week like Florida just had and say, hey, that could be the difference maker, unlocking extra time for recovery and game planning. But that is all out the window when you fire a coach during the bye week. Sure, I believe the assistants at Florida are going to do their very best to keep it together as well as they can this week, but I don't see this messy Florida situation overcoming a highly motivated Georgia team's intensity or performance. Give me Georgia 31-17 covering the 7.5. In our third hunch of the week, we've got the number 22 Houston Cougars, 13.5 point favorites, giving West Virginia its sixth straight loss and fifth overall loss by 14 or more points this year. Now, I gotta admit, I've spent a lot of this season doubting Houston. I've picked against them several times, and yet they have continued to win and continued to stick right in the Big 12 race. This Cougar team isn't just a great defense anymore. Texas A&M transfer quarterback Connor Weigman has Houston's offense on a tear since that Texas Tech loss. They've won 3 straight games, averaging 31.3 points per game. Weigman, for his part, has completed over 70% of his passes, averaging 8.9 yards per attempt. That is going downfield, and 6 touchdowns with 0 giveaways. Talk about great offensive football. And the Houston defenses continue to perform well also, holding their last 3 opponents to just 20.8 points per game, which is good enough for 21st nationally on the year. West Virginia has got to figure out what they're going to do about that defense. The Mountaineers started the year more run heavy, which was reflected in the fact that they're the 6th ranked rush offense in the Big 12 today. But that has flipped of late with a 3rd quarterback change in Morgantown. The Mountaineers started the year with Nico Marchiol under center. Then they moved to dual threat Khalil Watkins, who still happens to be West Virginia's leading rusher on the season, before a couple of weeks ago moving once again to current starter Scotty Fox Jr. And along the way, West Virginia has lost conference games by 31 to Kansas, 34 to Utah, 14 to BYU, 32 to UCF, and 6 to TCU. One of these things is not like the other. And in the spirit of Kenny Powers, TCU, you're effing out. Now, Scotty Fox Jr., you've got a great college football name. Truly, one of the best of the year. But I'm afraid that your 41 pass attempts and 300-yard performance in last week's loss to TCU is not going to travel to Houston against this defense. Maybe you can put 10 points on the board, but I doubt you're going to get much more than that against a Houston team that's light on style points and probably eager to log a few here. And look, we know that your defense isn't stopping anyone, having given up 38-plus points in 4 of your 5 Big 12 games so far this year. Even though I was a hater on the Houston offense for weeks, I believe Houston makes that 5 this week. Houston 40-10, easily covering the 13.5. All right, in our 4th hunch of the week, we have the San Diego State Aztecs, 10.5 point favorites, and we believe that they are going to put a hurting on the Wyoming Cowboys this weekend. Yes, we're back on the Aztec bandwagon, which has been pretty kind to barely qualified picks so far this season. And in fairness, we've had SDSUs back for several weeks now as the rest of the country just starts waking up to what they're doing. And what they're doing is very impressive. The first few weeks where the Aztecs were on our radar, it was all because of their defense. Outside of a stumble against Washington State, in which they did allow 36 points, which is shocking in hindsight, really, the Aztec defense has otherwise been lights out this year. They have 3 shutouts, 3 on the season, and are first in every single defensive statistical category in the Mountain West. Again, when you strip out that WSU anomaly, the defense is allowing just 6 points per game. 6 points per freaking game. And it's not just defense with SDSU anymore. Quarterback Jaden Denegal has really rounded into form. He's only averaging 18 pass attempts per game, but he's generating 195 yards on 73% completion and over 11 yards per attempt. Talk about hitting big plays. And that's enabled by number 1 wide receiver Jordan Napier, who has 567 yards on the season and did have a quiet game against Fresno, but had 2 back-to-back 100-yard games directly prior to that Fresno performance. And both of those guys Napier and Denegal are enabled by superstar running back Lucky Sutton, who has 662 yards on 5.3 yards per carry and 7 touchdowns on the year, and has racked up 325 yards and 4 scores just in those same last 3 games. So, first question. Do we think Wyoming can score on this vaunted Aztec defense? Yes, the Cowboys put 28 on Colorado State following their dismissal of Jay Norvell, and they did put 35 on San Jose State as well. But both of those teams are light years away from San Diego State's talent and performance trends on both sides of the ball. I think we're better suited looking at Wyoming's performance against opponents like UNLV, where they lost 31-17, Utah, where they got pounded 31-6, and even Colorado, where they lost 37-20. Those 3 matchups give us much more insight in forecasting how they'll look against San Diego State. And the answer is probably not great, Bob. Wyoming's rush defense is their weakness, and their pass defense is markedly better. But San Diego State is going to punish Wyoming on the ground, and they have a clear track record, as we just discussed, of taking the right shots at the right time to keep the defense stretched and make them pay. Wyoming ain't ready for this smoke. Their offense may be balanced, and typically they like to use the run to set up the pass, but from our perspective, that just means there's a good likelihood that Wyoming can't get anything going against this defense, and the offense sputters to a couple field goals or more, aka right on par for the San Diego State defense. Give me the Aztecs 27-6 in covering the 10.5. And finally, in our 5th pick of the week, we have the Washington State Cougars, 3.5-point favorites to win Game 1 of the Pac-2 Championship at Oregon State this week. The Beavers are 1-7 and coming off their first win of the year over Lafayette. Not to be confused with FBS powerhouse Louisiana Lafayette. This is FCS Lafayette. The beauty, though, of playing in the Pac-2 this year, at least if you're Oregon State, is you can be 1-7 and still have a chance to finish the year with a perfect 2-0 conference record. That's right, these teams are going to meet twice this year in a scheduling anomaly that was created by the downfall of the once illustrious Pac-12 conference. And while there finally are some stakes that matter for Oregon State, we don't see them turning this season around in this spot. Washington State has definitely faltered in some games this year. Yes, they got blown out by North Texas, and they got blown out by UW. But WSU has also outperformed expectations with narrow losses at Ole Miss, narrow loss at Virginia, and a decisive 28-7 home win against the best the MAC had to offer in Toledo last week. Keep doubting WSU, but those North Texas and UW games feel like eons ago. I think that Oregon State will hang in this game for a half, but they're going to fail to stick with the Cougars for the entirety of it. Give me Washington State 28-20 covering the 3.5. All right, now moving on to our big game tracker. As I mentioned at the top of the show, this is a new segment in place of others receiving votes that covers the key games with the most potential to move the needle across the country each week. Now, before we dive in, credit to James Madison. We've been tracking James Madison a bit as one of the group of 5 contenders. They were a 6.5-point favorite at Texas State, which is going to be one of the new founding members of the new Pac-12 next year, and they blew Texas State out 52-20. They, even without Curt Cignetti, want you to take notice of what they are doing this year. All right, as we get into the big game tracker, first up is number 1 Ohio State minus 20.5 against Penn State at home. What this could have been. Does Penn State examine how their conqueror, UCLA, dug deep after Deshaun Foster was fired and find that same inspiration to try and steal some redemption on the national stage? Can Jim Knowles, who was Ohio State's defensive coordinator last year, and this Nittany Lion defense play to their maximum potential and put the clamps on Julian Sayin, superstar wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, fellow superstar wide receiver Carnell Tate, and crew? Can Penn State quarterback Ethan Grunkemeyer, filling in for injured Drew Aller, and the Penn State offense get, anything going against this S-tier Buckeye defense? I think not. Give me the Buckeyes 38-10. In our next game, we have number 9 Vanderbilt plus 1.5 at number 20 Texas. As I mentioned earlier, in one of the funnier and sometimes more frustrating dynamics of Power 4 mega conferences, It's hard to know what to make of two teams in the same conference because they often don't play each other. And these two SEC teams have not had a single common opponent through 8 games. Even without the always trusty transitive property to rely on, though, we're leaning Super Pavia and Vanderbilt's direction in this one. Yes, DKR is going to be packed, and the Longhorn fans ain't happy with the way this season has gone. And in their credit, this season isn't over. Texas isn't out of the playoff race entirely, so expect full volume from that packed crowd. But Arch Manning is in concussion protocol. He's not looking likely to play, and even if he does, what Arch Manning do we get? That's a huge edge in Vandy's favor. The doors also are not a one-dimensional flash in the pan. Texas would likely be 3.5-point underdogs if they hadn't miraculously capitalized on Mississippi State's total choke job. When you put those two things together, it makes it pretty easy to back Super Pavia and crew in this one. Give me Vanderbilt 2017. All right, now we head to Salt Lake City, where the number 17 Cincinnati Bearcats are without their starting running back and 8.5-point dogs at the number 24 Utah Utes, even without their starting running back. Even without Pryor. This line felt a little high. The Bearcats haven't lost since the season opener against Nebraska 2017. They've won at Kansas, they've beaten Iowa State, they've beaten Baylor, and they've beaten UCF. Those are good opponents and good wins. Meanwhile, Utah came into the season with plenty of buzz, but their season thus far has come down to 2 games. A 42-10 stomping of Arizona State, who was without quarterback Sam Leavitt, and a 34-10 stomping by Texas Tech. Yes, Utah handed Deion Sanders the worst loss of his coaching career last week against Colorado, 53-7. But does that warrant a nearly double-digit spread at home against Cincinnati? Once again, I think not. Cincinnati to cover, Utah to win 27-24. All right, now we move to the East Coast, where we've got number 8 Georgia Tech, 8.5-point favorites at NC State. And this is a decent number to cover, but it's one that Tech has covered in multiple wins this year. The Jackets are now unanimously considered to be in the playoff picture at the moment. Brent Key is going to have a spotlight on his coaching performance every week from here on out. And who doesn't want to look and perform their best on stage in front of the whole country? Tech is going to have to do it on the Wolfpack stage, though, marking just their 4th road game this year. They've played at Colorado, at Wake, and at Duke. NC State, for its part, has made a habit of losing games by double digits lately. You put all that together, you shake it up, and we think what comes out is a 35-24 win for Georgia Tech, continuing on their road to the playoffs. All right, next we've got Arizona minus 4.5 at Colorado. You might say, Dennis, why is this on the big game tracker? It's on the big game tracker because Deion. Could Deion be next coach fired? Could Deion do something and just quit? It's hard to imagine that because he's got a big buyout waiting for him if Colorado decides to go in another direction. And look, if they get smashed by Arizona this weekend, that might happen after last week's 53-7 loss. The results are obviously poor. It's never easy bouncing back from a loss like that. Deion also has a well-publicized history of health issues and complications that have to make this season feel even more lost and even more worse for the wear. We don't think Arizona is going to whoop up on Colorado. We actually think Colorado will cover the 4.5, but we think Arizona will slip by with a 24-21 win. Okay, we've got 2 more for you. First up, Oklahoma, number 18 at number 14, Tennessee. Tennessee is a 4.5-point favorite in this game. This is a top 20 SEC matchup, 2 two-loss teams. Essentially, we'll go WWE style and call it a loser leaves town match for the playoff. Oklahoma just dropped a big game at home to Ole Miss. They're undoubtedly going to be hungry to get back on a winning track. And Tennessee, for their part, just wants to keep winning. They crushed Kentucky last week. Give me the home team here, Tennessee 27-24, but give me Oklahoma to cover the 4.5. And finally, we've got number 23 USC, a 6.5-point favorite at Nebraska. Can USC get their second road win of the season in Lincoln? Look, the offense is still going to be without both of its top 2 running backs in Wayman Jordan, who's out for multiple weeks, and Eli Sanders, who's out for the year. It's going to be an air attack approach for the Trojans as a result. And if you asked me prior to the Nebraska-Minnesota game, we'd have thought that lined up well for the Cornhusker defense. They were passing heavy. But the Gophers exploited what had been a very reliable secondary, and the Trojan passing attack is far more potent than Minnesota's. So, yes, this game is at Nebraska, and that does matter. No, we don't like backing USC here. So we'll call this a slight lean and nothing more, but give us USC 27-20. Okay, that's all we've got for the big game tracker. We hope that you guys like this shift in approach to cover some of the bigger, more notable games as opposed to the others receiving votes that, might not be on most folks' radar. To wrap up this week, I'd love to give you Uncle Denny's top 10 trick-or-treats. As I mentioned at the top of the show, these are the best candies that I believe you can pull out of a trick-or-treat bag. These are the candies that I am hoping to dad tax my kids this year when they come home with their treat sacks from trick-or-treating. And it starts with Zots at number 1. Zots are not the most widespread candy. They've had a bit of a resurgence lately, but Zots were big when I was a kid, and nothing quite compares to when the fizz of that Zot comes through the hard candy shell and hits your tongue. After Zots, I'm going with a Halloween classic, Grape Nerds, that little purple box of Grape Nerds. I love both the purple box and the pink box, but if you're going to give me a choice, give me purple over pink. Number 3, in a Halloween-only candy, a piece of candy I would not eat throughout the rest of the year, give me a Butterfinger. But I'm not going to eat it right out of the bag. Let's throw that little guy in the freezer and let's let him get cold. Number 4, the only gummy that anyone should accept is a Haribo gummy. And the only gummy bear is a Haribo gummy bear. And that is number 4 on my list. I love a good Haribo gummy, especially a Haribo gummy bear. Number 5 are caramel apple pops. This is actually the most fitting lollipop for Halloween. It's always a unique shape as, everyone is dipped in caramel. They all come out looking a little different. And now caramel apple pops has different flavors. They've got the Granny Smith. They have a red delicious. They have like a yellow version now. I've got to say, I'm not thrilled with the two new, the red and the yellow. I really like the green caramel apple pop. Give me the classic. But hey, I love that we have choices. Number 6 are atomic warheads, one of the few sour things that you can get from a treat bag that's actually sour. Thank you, warheads, for remaining true to yourself. Number 7, I'm going to give you another piece of chocolate. There's not a lot of chocolate on here, just a few pieces, but this is the 100 Grand Bar, which we believe also better frozen, superior in every way to a Snickers or a Milky Way, what have you. The 100 Grand Bar is the best kind of mixed chocolate bar out there. In the number 8 slot, we've got a Charms Blow Pop. It's not as perfect as a caramel apple pop. It's not as perfect in many ways as even a Dum Dum, but it's bigger, plus you get gum. You can't go wrong with a Charms Blow Pop. For my money, I'm going to go back and I'm going to say the Sour Apple is the best. And then we've got the Charleston Chew in the 9th spot. 3 different types of Charleston Chews. Charleston Chews are another candy like Zots that felt very omnipresent when I was a kid, and then sort of went away. Most grocery stores didn't even have them on shelves, but they've had a resurgence of late as well. So give me a Charleston Chew at number 9. Among vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, the Neapolitan flavors, give me strawberry. And then finally, Runts. I haven't had a Runt in a long time. I always look forward to the little plastic bag of Runts that come out of the treat bags, and really it's for one Runt. It's for the banana Runt, and I know that that's divisive. R.I.P. Mom. My mom loved banana Runts. I have definitely a sweet tooth and a special taste for banana Runts. We'll always love them. Those are my top 10 candies. If you'd like, throw a comment under what your favorite candy is. Would love to hear about it. I hope everybody has a most amazing Halloween. Stay safe. Have a great night. I hope the weather performs for you and you enjoy all the time that you have with friends, with family, with neighbors. And in the meantime, may the betting gods bless your picks, and we'll be back to you tomorrow with our NFL picks.